Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Samantha Dean.
Good evening. Tonight our topic is women and the law. In many instances, women are accorded different treatment under the law simply and solely on the basis of sex. We're going to be discussing some of these differences with our two guests. DeCrow, who's a practicing lawyer in Syracuse, New York. She's also the author of Sexist Justice and The Young Woman's Guide to Liberation. She was also a former mayoral candidate for Syracuse, New York. Also with us is Cathy Douglas, who is another practicing lawyer and is married to a gentleman who is very definitely a practicing lawyer in his own right. He is Supreme Court Justice William Douglas. You know, we're constantly being reminded of the fact that we've come a long way. As lawyers, just how far do you think we have come in terms of legal emancipation?
Well, certainly a great victory for women in terms of the law was that the Equal Rights Amendment got through Congress. This is, for 40 years, something we've been working for. However, I think basically we have not come very far at all. To start with, the laws are made by men in this country. The state legislatures are mostly composed of men. The Congress is mostly composed of men. The laws are administered by men. The police forces are male. And certainly the laws are interpreted by men because the judges are men. I think about 0.1% of the judges in this country are women. And when you go to court, to get your day in court, whether you're woman or man, chances are you will have a male lawyer. So in terms of the law, I feel we've come a bit far from, say, Middle Ages in England, but not very far at all, really.
Well, are you confident of the Equal Rights Amendment being ratified by, 38 states that's necessary to have it passed?
Yes, I think it will be passed. I think it's going to be a fight because there's so much misinformation about the Equal Rights Amendment, but I think it will come through.
Well, there are many objections which I, as a layperson, have heard raised. One is the fact that the husband will no longer have the onus to support the family. The privacy right, for whatever that's worth, in dormitories, in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, in restaurants and so on, will be done away with. What other objections are there?
Well, all the objections to the Equal Rights Amendment I feel are false. I believe that the amendment will come through certainly before the 7 years that we have to get the 38 states. I think the press has misinformed people to some extent. I don't think that the American public really knows that if a state legislature has turned down the amendment, it can be brought up again at any time, and that the composition of state legislatures is changing every 2 years, and many more women are getting in, and many more people with a feminist orientation. As far as the arguments against it, in a third of the states already, a spouse is required to support a spouse.
Meaning of either sex?
Right.
Yes.
So the opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment, who are on television, it seems like every night, saying that the husband will no longer be required to support the wife, obviously don't know what the real facts are, which is, first of all, while a marriage is in existence, the court will not step in to say to what extent the husband should support at all, has no rights at all to step into an existing marriage. At the time of divorce, most women are not allotted alimony. Those that get alimony usually get small sums. And I believe the figure is 10 years after a divorce, only 2% of the women are collecting alimony. The reasons why this is not well known is that, Johnny Carson gets divorced and his wife gets all this money and everyone says, oh, the poor men, they really get hit. Those of us who actually work with women know that divorced women are usually extremely poor. Their standard of living invariably goes down. The Equal Rights Amendment, I think, will help in the area of child support. The average couple that gets divorced right now and has children, the wife gets custody. The husband usually does not want custody. It's not a question. He's been cheated out of it. She's given certain child support allotments, which if the husband decides he's not going to pay, she really has a wonderful time going into court every month to get. But even if he is paying, men make so much more money than women in our society that he's usually paying a much smaller percentage of his money to support that family than she is. If she's working in an office job or in a factory job, she's spending 101% of her income supporting those children, and he's not.
But in essence, equal rights is going to mean equal responsibility. So the statutes which do exist, which discriminate against men, will also be done away with. So it will be to the mutual advantage of both men and women.
You see, the Equal Rights Amendment simply says that a state shall not make classifications on the basis of sex. Now, every state has to classify, you know. They will pass laws for children where they're making a classification saying, well, we won't deal with people over 18, we'll deal with people under 18. That's a classification. They classify all the time. So the Equal Rights Amendment does not really touch on, per se, a man's duty to support his wife. It will not automatically abolish it because it does not say all people shall be equal and all women shall act like men. It merely says that when the state classifies, it shall not arbitrarily classify on the basis of sex. So the duty of a spouse who is working to support the spouse who is not working and to support the family unit will not be changed. What is changed is that right now the onus, the legal onus, is generally said to be on the male. And the wording now and the emphasis will be that on the spouse who supports. It will sort of neutralize your laws. It won't affect the right of the working partner to support anyone. It's just really a false thing.
About the Equal Rights Amendment is it will give women the access to better jobs in this country. It's an economic thing. In addition to, I feel, a spiritual and psychological thing. I really am humiliated not being constitutionally equal in my own country. And I feel millions of other women feel the same way. The main thing is that there are literally thousands of state laws in this country that discriminate against women.
All right, well, what do you feel are some of the most glaring inequities where women are discriminated against right now?
Women cannot work overtime in some states. That means that high-paying factory jobs are eliminated for them. Women cannot, for example, in the state of New York, work in mines or work in elevators. And some places, women, for example, cannot work as bartenders but can work as bar waitresses, which means they can have the low-paying job, but they can't have the high-paying job.
I was a bartender once.
Well, in criminal law, where do you feel some of the most glaring
I think the most glaring, really horrendous defect in the criminal law deals with young girls, juvenile girls. Activities sexual encounters that they have are more often than not considered deviant. And for that deviancy, many of them are institutionalized and taken away from their families. Where you would never find a young male, say a 14-year-old male, being called a deviant because he, caroused with women. In fact, they would
the reverse,
humor him and whatnot.
They like boys going out with girls.
Young girls,
is
juvenile
that what you're
girls.
calling deviancy? They're just going.
No, but this would be the context. Generally, of course, there would be disorganization within the family unit, and the young girl will either run away or be out after curfew, and she will then come in contact with the police. And she will have, generally around men or boys. They will look at her lifestyle. Any sexual behavior will be considered a deviancy, will be considered a symptom in defining her psychology and her relationship to her family. I worked for 2 years as a group parent in an in-resident treatment center for emotionally disturbed girls, and the scenario I described is a very common one of how young girls come into contact with the police, and the other way, of course, in the classroom.
What Cathy's saying is a young woman who, say, 16 years old, who's having sex relations with a boy and is engaging in no other criminal behavior, she's not stealing things, she's not taking cars, can be put in a home for juvenile delinquents.
With a disorganized family situation, whereas
a boy doing the same thing is not only not considered, that they should lock him up because he's having sexual relations, but also in all the family counselors and so on, they feel that a boy in high school certainly should be having sexual relations. It's not considered.
But see, it wouldn't be a symptom. This is what I'm saying. Usually when a child comes into running with the law or with a social institution, they look for symptoms of disease, symptoms of deviancy. And sex for a young girl is a symptom of deviancy. and I don't think it should be that.
And also probably in the universities, do you find that when the university is acting in loco parentis, they have a different standard for girls as for boys?
These laws are
They certainly
being watched
do.
out. You know where that comes into play a lot in getting custody of children. For a parent to be denied custody, the other parent has to show that this person isn't fit. And it's a very prevalent thing in most states that a woman who is not living with her husband, who is having sex relations with someone else, in other words, she has a boyfriend, in plain English, can be considered an unfit mother, and the cases are filled. Incidentally, this is changing. I think sex mores are changing, but the cases from the 50s and 60s and so on are filled with evidence put in on custody cases that the mother is an unfit mother simply because she has a boyfriend. Whereas if you just reverse it, a man who is not living with his wife, just as we're talking about juveniles, this is adults, is not only not considered unfit if he has women friends, he's considered some sort of strange duck if he doesn't. This is the double standard that works from, when we're talking about kids.
But
If we
also
can just go back
yes,
just a second, go back to the juveniles and in the criminal process, is that then once this young juvenile girl becomes, and it's more than just the bias of sex, I mean, it's just more than that, reasons that she comes in contact. But once she does come in contact with institutionals, she is very apt to come in contact with them for the rest of her life. We have so few forms of family living. I mean, so few. If a child is incompatible in the home, the general determination is to call it incorrigible. And again, it's incorrigible if a girl
So once
is
a
in
label
sex.
is affixed,
Yes.
it's there for
Then
life. You
the
mean.
parents, under almost the slightest provocation, can have the child institutionalized. Once you're institutionalized, the child, the whole lifestyle changes, and the child is profoundly affected. And these young girls who then become women are very, very apt to come in contact with the criminal process, perhaps as prostitutes, and now young girls are committing violent crimes. The increase in female violent crime in 10 years has been about 230%.
Is that so?
That's an increase, I mean, from what
They still
used to
commit
do.
practically no violent crimes compared to men.
Talking
Oh, yes,
about
it's very-
prostitutes and talking about the double standard, how is this reconcilable that a prostitute, when she is arrested, is convicted, is rather charged with a misdemeanor? A man he is arrested in company of a prostitute, is charged with a violation.
And
What is the
also he's
justification
usually not
for this?
charged.
Oh, not charged
He's
at all,
not
right.
picked up.
Right.
There was a big thing to clean up Times Square, and they were picking up the Johns. But basically, the men aren't picked up. Actually, this has a long history. It's part of the woman-hating tradition of Western civilization. I've got old cases from, say, the 1800s when young girls in England were prostitutes. I guess there was a taste for 11, 12-year-old girls. And the English lords and noblemen and so on were patronizing them. When there's one case that I can think of where an 11-year-old girl who's about to be sent off to prison for being a prostitute is about to name her clients, and the judge stops her and says, "Silence, do not defame the name of any of our marvelous lords."
Sounds like a Daumier painting.
In this court, she's not allowed, to even mention who her clients are. The feeling is that women are, well, actually in the law there are two trends on women. One is that we're evil sirens luring men, to their doom. Then there's the other law. We have to protect women. Obviously, we can't let them work in jobs after 5 p.m. because terrible things might happen to them. But in this whole evil thing, women, first of all, of course, are in prostitution because we can't earn very much money doing anything else. So uneducated women throughout the ages have turned to prostitution. We are there because a male-run society has kept us out of earning money. And then once we get in there, of course, there are no prostitutes without customers, but the customers are not penalized and the prostitutes are.
Of course, a counter-argument might be to this, that the prostitute has a different relationship to the crime as opposed to the man. The prostitute has intercourse many more times, and therefore the likelihood of spreading venereal disease is very much greater. She also is involved with the commercial aspect, whereas the man, so to speak, is a little bit not exonerated, but at any rate there's a different relationship, wouldn't you say?
I don't think so. Actually, I think, although prostitution does not strike me as a great occupation for women. I think any women that are forced to go into prostitution, because you know many of the jobs, like being a waitress, are very hard and very low paying. The alternatives are, you know, to be lawyers and brain surgeons and so on. A woman who is in prostitution, it seems to me it's her business. I think prostitution should completely be decriminalized and taken off the
I think
books.
she's more exonerated. She's providing a service which is one that's necessary and one that there has been called for all through history.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
If men weren't consenting to this, there would be no prostitution.
Yes.
I read of a case a little while ago in Texas, I think it was, where a man was convicted of murder because he shot the lover of his wife in a motel bedroom. The wife was caught in a compromising situation. Now, he got off this charge on justifiable homicide. I'm just curious if a woman would have similar recourse under the
No.
law if she shot her husband's mistress. Any
does
chance
not-
I've
of
never
that?
heard of a case like that.
No, I've never heard of a case like
Women
that.
aren't supposed to be that
Yeah, you
passionate.
see, your husband isn't considered your property, but in the law, in the whole English common law, a wife is considered the property of her husband. So in a sense, it's as if he's defending his house, or he sees his car being driven down the street, you know, he goes into a rage. I don't think the law recognizes.
So are you saying that
that
there is
women-
different sentencing here on the basis of sex?
Yes, actually, many courts have already held that, of course, that's unconstitutional. It's a denial of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. But there were cases, we were talking before about, for example, in one of the Middle Atlantic states, if a man is convicted of drunkenness, he can get up to 30 days. And a woman convicted of drunkenness can get up to 3 years. And that's very
But
unequal
actually, I
sentencing.
think often they give men stronger sentences than women for similar crimes. I know in
And-
some of the southern states, a man can get 2 or 3 more years for assault and battery, more than a woman.
And bail is very often placed higher for a man, isn't
Yes,
it?
than
Men
a
are
woman.
considered more dangerous than
Well,
women.
but statistically that's true in terms
are,
of
yeah.
violent crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Men, crimes that affect the person and property is more, well, 95% of the time done by a man. And this is why prison has been felt to be, prisons are generally found to be not good for anyone and not therapeutic for anyone, but particularly for women. 75% of the women in prison are mothers. Women in prison are anywhere from 18 to 28 years old, so they're very young. They have an average education of only the 10th grade. So they, while they are in prison, they are generally not violent in the sense that society would fear them for physical safety. And the lives that are affected by being, say, the head of the household, in terms of the children, is enormous. So they have thought for women, we should start using many more alternatives than prison. And some of the ones, aside from bail, are sort of, say you arrest a woman for prostitution or any crime that you can think of. If the woman is young, and this is a first offense, what they're trying to do is suspend the arrest, so to speak, turn her over to a job training program, which is what women prisoners ask for most. And then if in the course of 90 or 120 days she's involved in the program and does not involve herself in any more criminal activity, they'll drop the charges and they won't prosecute.
Talking
And
about the job
that's a good-
training that women get in prison, women get job training for low-paying, horrible, crummy jobs.
There's really no training at all.
Or
in
if
essence.
in these ideal model programs, they'll get trained for low-paying kinds of jobs, so that there's really no alternative but to go out and.
Talking about men
Indeed.
committing more violent crimes than women, if a man batters and assaults his wife, can she sue him?
Oh yes.
She can.
But
I
she-
have the
yes, she
feeling
can,
that
yeah.
if it was an outside third party, she could sue him, but it's hard to sue
No,
your
you
husband.
can't
You
assault
that's
your
been changed.
wife. One thing that you can't
No,
do.
but can you sue? Can the wife sue?
You can have the district attorney go in against.
Well,
the
you're talking about criminal, but in the civil area, that has changed. Wives can now
Yeah.
sue civilly their husbands, but it's changing state by state, and I imagine that there are still states
probably
probably
you can't
left where
sue
a
in
wife
civil
can't
court.
sue a husband.
One thing that's very
But
interesting is rape is defined in most states as sexual activity with an unwilling woman who is not your wife. You can't rape your own wife.
That's right.
So whereas you can assault your own wife, and of course, you know, our courts are not allowing men to go around assaulting their wives. rape is allowed, and there are horror stories. Anyone who has women clients calling knows that men come home drunk and, you know, do in fact assault their wives, but if you press charges, things are not going to get better. They're only going to get worse.
It seems one of the few areas in the law where the onus is on the victim to prove her innocence,
well, rape is
rather
the
than
classic.
on the defendant.
Yeah,
the
rape,
assaultant.
of course, is the area where corroboration is needed in most states, and where the victim is put on trial, and things like her chastity come into court. There's, I use this line all the time. I think it's amazing.
Because I think that's legitimate in some.
Well, there's an assumption that if you will have sexual relations with any man who's not your husband, you will, of course,
I
have
mean
it.
within an immediate circumstance. I see not generally
Yeah.
what your sex life is like.
Well, they do ask you that, and that's admissible in
Let's
court.
move into the
Yes,
area
it is.
of civil law, shall we, for a little while. What do you feel are the inequities here? I've heard kinds of stories that a woman, for instance, cannot get a loan on a business venture unless her husband is willing to co-sign. Is this a fact, and how many states does this affect?
Well, each state has its own laws, but by and large, you could say, just if you're talking in a national way, that in every state, women are disadvantaged in some way as far as managing businesses, selling property, buying property, making contracts, and it does differ from state to state.
I don't think that getting the loan really is statutory at all. I think it's the practices of the mortgage
How about
banking
being
companies.
a guarantor for her husband's debts or third-party
She
debts?
can.
She can do that.
Yeah, she can be that. I heard that female emancipation in the legal field has probably progressed as far as it can, or as far as it has in any other field, in the area of property, particularly in California, where there are communal property situations. What do you feel about this?
Well, community property in California is not fair. It is, the husband has a lot more control over the property than does the wife.
Well, this in Washington State, where I have a legal residence and have taken the bar there, I don't know the results. Community property for real property, meaning land, has always required the husband and wife, just like in common law. You can never sell property without both parties. But the difference has always been in the personality, which is very important. These are stocks and bonds, which is the majority wealth in this country is now personal property, where in times past it was real property. Well, it used to be that the husband was the manager of the community property, and he could sell all of the community property, all of the personalty, without permission of the wife. What he couldn't do is give it away. That was an anti-mistress law. So a man in a community property state could not give, in Washington State, couldn't give money away. But last year, 72, Washington State passed their state equal rights amendment. And as a result, now both the man and the wife are equal managers. Each can manage under the same restrictions as previously the husband was under. So now the wife cannot also give gifts. And this includes like being the beneficiary of an insurance policy. A husband cannot change, and now a wife cannot change from the beneficiary. If the beneficiary is the husband, and she wants to change it to someone else, she can't do it without his permission, but neither can he. So that has been changed and is now
That
equal.
is
But that
something
was
you
a
were
devastating.
You were saying that I think affects, practically every woman. It's not a law that women can't get loans, but as a matter of fact, if a woman tries to buy a house, she can't get money. A woman called me the other day and said she works, she has money, she wanted to sign a contract to have $18,000 worth of new kitchen put in. She obviously was playing her traditional role very well. She wanted a new kitchen. And the kitchen guy wouldn't even speak to her. And she said, well, my husband's not interested in kitchens, This is my kitchen, I work, I've been working all my life to afford this kitchen. They wouldn't even talk to her. There are instances where, there are suits actually in many, many states, where when a bank is evaluating whether or not to give a loan or how much to give, they simply ignore the wife's salary, or they use a half of the wife's salary. There are instances where women cannot get credit in stores. What happens to people, and it's come to public attention, of course, when it happens to public figures. Woman has a job with a network television or something, and she gets married, and suddenly her credit is all canceled. She has to reapply for credit in stores, in banks. You can't go buy a car on your own salary. Now, these are all things that not only are detrimental to a woman in actually what she's trying to do, you know, she's trying to buy a house for her and her kids to live in, they also really do enormous psychological damage, because every time this happens, you think, well, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not a regular citizen. I'm not a regular person.
The point is, no decision should be based on stereotyping. I mean, it should be based on whatever factual basis exists.
Yeah, is
and
this
that's
person
what
a
the
credit
Equal
risk?
Rights Amendment is about. That decisions won't be made, oh, well, women don't do this, or men don't do this, or children don't do this. We're letting each individual human being make the decisions for herself. There are many regulations in schools, there have been, where women are said they must, if they become pregnant, they must cease working at, say, the 5th month. Well, some women may have to quit at the 2nd month, and other women may be able to go to almost term. And what women's liberation, I think, is talking about, and certainly the Equal Rights Amendment, is that no longer will we arbitrarily make these decisions. We're going to let each person on their own reality make the decision for themselves. And the decisions are varied. Like the problems of women poor women are just, and independence among poor women are just totally different from women who have husbands or who themselves earn a great deal of money. I mean, independence, to be able to be poor and raise 10 children all on your own isn't exactly a treat. I mean, women aren't going to pick it to get it.
Poor women will be affected the most probably by the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment will make illegal, for example, the differences in job training programs. The federal government is paying for job training all over this country. They call it manpower training, and that's exactly what it is. It's training men for high-paying jobs so that they can enter the mainstream of American society.
Of course, we don't
training women either for no jobs at all or for low-paying jobs. This will all be just rendered illegal by the Equal
Point
Rights
of
Amendment.
information, what percentage of the legal profession is composed of women?
We were arguing on statistics earlier, because the most recent poll I've seen, which was stating that the difference in percentage between 1950 and 1970 is negligible, that 4% of the lawyers and judges, about 4.5% of the lawyers and judges in the United States are women.
Yeah, and I
You
heard
heard lesser.
2.9%. Each is so
Anyway, not very
ridiculously
many.
small. However, there
Karen-
is a cheerful statistic.
Quick, cheerful statistic we have to
More
close.
women entered law school in September 1972 than had entered in the 15 years previous.
That's a very optimistic note to close on. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back again next week. Hope you can join us then. Good night from Woman.